The scholarship to Hanguk Elite Academy in Seoul had come through an international academic excellence program that selected 12 students from across the world every year. Adaora had applied on a Tuesday, submitted her essays on Wednesday, and received the acceptance letter on a Thursday morning that her mother had printed out, laminated, and hung on the sitting room wall before Adaora had even finished reading it. Her father had cried. Her brothers had teased her. Her cousin Emeka had said, "Adaora, don't come back speaking Korean and forgetting us." And she had said, "Emeka, I already speak Korean." And he had gone very quiet. She had been teaching herself Korean for 2 years, using a combination of language apps, K-dramas, and sheer stubbornness. She was not fluent. She was functional. There was a difference, and she respected it. She arrived in Seoul on a Sunday. Her scholarship housing was a small but clean room in a student residence 3 kilometers from the school. She had a bed, a desk, a window with a view of a convenience store, and approximately 45,000 won to her name until her first monthly stipend arrived in 2 weeks. She bought the bicycle from a second-hand shop on Monday morning for 30,000 won, named it Chukwuemeka after her grandfather, because her grandfather had also been reliable and slightly rusty, and rode it to school on Tuesday. Pause. Now, before we talk about what happened on Tuesday, we need to talk about Hanguk Elite Academy. Hanguk Elite Academy was not a school. It was a statement. 40 acres of immaculate grounds in the heart of Seoul, architecture that looked like someone had given an unlimited budget to a person who really loved glass and marble and the concept of intimidation. The student body was approximately 800 students, 90% of whom came from families whose names appeared regularly in Korean financial newspapers. The remaining 10% were international scholarship students who arrived every year with their brilliance and their dreams, and were reminded, in ways both subtle and completely unsubtle, that they were guests. The school had its own coffee shop, its own recording studio, a rooftop garden, a gym that was better equipped than most professional facilities, and a parking situation that Adaora discovered on Tuesday morning was composed entirely of luxury vehicles that cost more than some houses. She rode Chukwuemeka through the main gate at 8:14 a.m. The gate attendant looked at her. She looked back at him. He looked at the bicycle. She looked at him looking at the bicycle. He said, very carefully, "Miss, this entrance is for..." She said, "Students, yes, I am a student. Adaora Okafor, scholarship program, international intake. You can check the list." She smiled. It was a very patient smile. The kind of smile that had been doing a lot of work for a long time. He checked the list. He found her name. He opened the gate with the energy of a man who had many feelings he was choosing not to express. She rode Chukwuemeka through. Pause. The front courtyard of Hanguk Elite Academy at 8:15 a.m. on a Tuesday was a specific kind of beautiful chaos. Students arriving in cars that had drivers. Students in uniforms that had been tailored, not just purchased. Small clusters of people who had clearly known each other since birth, speaking in the particular shorthand of people who have never had to introduce themselves anywhere. And then Adaora rode through on Chukwuemeka. The silence that followed was not immediate. It was gradual. It spread from the students nearest the gate outward like a ripple, each person nudging the next, until approximately 200 people were watching a black girl in a perfectly pressed uniform with box braids piled high on her head, riding a slightly rusty bicycle through the most expensive school courtyard in Seoul, completely unbothered, looking for somewhere to park. She found a railing near the main entrance. She locked Chukwuemeka to it with a combination lock she had bought from the same second-hand shop. She patted the handlebars once, said quietly, "Good boy," and walked inside. Nobody moved for 3 full seconds. Then everybody moved at once. Now, the war did not start that Tuesday. The war started because of what happened as a result of that Tuesday. And the person it started with was a boy named Shin Jiwoo. Shin Jiwoo was 21 years old, the only son of Shin Dae-jun, who was the chairman of the Shin Group, which was one of the 3 largest conglomerates in South Korea. He was tall, sharp-featured, and possessed of a quiet authority that the entire school had organized itself around so naturally and for so long that most people had forgotten there was ever a time before it. He was not loud. He did not need to be loud. He was the kind of person that rooms adjusted for, that conversations paused for, that people smoothed their clothes and straightened their backs for without quite realizing they were doing it. He was also, and this is important, not a bad person. He was a complicated person. There is a difference, and this story respects it. He had seen Adaora arrive from the second-floor window of the main building where he had been standing with his 2 closest friends, Han Min-jae, who was effortlessly charming and deeply unbothered by most things, and Jung Soo-bin, who was quiet and observant and noticed everything 3 minutes before anyone else did. Min-jae had watched Adaora lock the bicycle to the railing and said, "Interesting." Soo-bin had said, "She's on the scholarship list. International intake. Top score in the program's history, apparently." Jiwoo had said nothing. He had watched her pat the bicycle handlebars and walk inside and felt something shift very slightly in the back of his mind, the way a door shifts when someone opens a window in the same house, and he had filed it away and gone back to his morning. The problem started at lunch. Adaora sat in the cafeteria, which was less a cafeteria and more a restaurant that had decided to be generous with its square footage, at a table near the window because she liked light and she liked being able to see outside. She had her lunch, her notebook, and no particular interest in the social architecture of the room. She did not know, because nobody had told her, that the table she was sitting at was the table. The one that Jiwoo and his circle occupied every single day with the unspoken permanence of a national monument. It was not written anywhere. It did not need to be written anywhere. Everyone simply knew. Everyone except Adaora. Jiwoo arrived at lunch with Min-jae and Soo-bin and found a black girl with box braids eating rice and reading what appeared to be a dense economics textbook at his table, completely absorbed, occasionally making notes in the margin with a green pen. The cafeteria went very quiet. Min-jae pressed his lips together in the way he did when he was trying not to smile. Soo-bin looked at the ceiling briefly. Jiwoo walked over. He stood at the end of the table. Adaora did not look up. She turned a page, made a note, and then apparently felt the presence because she looked up and found him standing there and said, pleasantly, "Oh, hi. Are you looking for a seat? There's space." Jiwoo looked at her. She looked back at him. He said, "This is my table." She looked at the table, then back at him. "I don't see your name on it." Min-jae turned fully away and looked at a wall. Jiwoo said, "Everyone knows this is my table." Adaora said, very reasonably, "I'm not from here. I didn't get the memo. Is there a map? Because a map would have been helpful." She paused. "Also, there is genuinely a lot of space here. I'm one person. I take up this much space." She indicated herself. "You are 3 people. You take up that much space. The table fits 8. The math is working. The cafeteria was silent enough to hear the air conditioning. Jiwoo looked at her for a long moment. Something was happening behind his eyes. It was not quite anger. It was not quite amusement. It was the expression of a person encountering something genuinely new for the first time in a while, and not being entirely sure how to catalog it. He sat down, not at a different table, at the same table, across from her. Min-jae and Subin sat too. Min-jae with the energy of someone settling in to watch something excellent. Subin with the quiet attention of someone taking careful notes. Adaora looked at the three of them, decided this was fine, and went back to her economics textbook. Jiwoo said, "What are you reading?" She said, without looking up, "Stiglitz on market failures. It's for the advanced economics seminar. Have you taken it?" He said, "I teach the study group for it." She looked up, looked at him properly for the first time. He was, objectively, and she was noting this purely academically, extremely good-looking. Sharp jaw, eyes that were doing something complicated. The particular composure of someone who had never needed to try very hard at anything and had somehow not been ruined by it. She said, "Interesting. I have some questions about Chapter 7 then." He blinked. She opened to Chapter 7. That was lunch on Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, the story of the girl who had sat at Shin Jiwoo's table and argued with him about seating arrangements and then asked him economics questions had traveled through the entire school with the speed and enthusiasm of information that people find genuinely entertaining. By Wednesday afternoon, a girl named Kang Yuna had found Adaora. Kang Yuna was the kind of beautiful that came with infrastructure. The right family, the right clothes, the right connections, and 3 years of being the most socially powerful girl at Hanguk Elite Academy. She was not the villain of this story. This story does not have clean villains. But she was the person who decided on Wednesday afternoon that Adaora was a problem that needed to be addressed. She found Adaora at Chukwuemeka. Adaora was unlocking her bicycle after classes, box braids slightly loosened from the day, uniform still immaculate because Adaora had strong feelings about looking put together. Yuna arrived with 2 friends and said, in very clean English because she wanted to make sure she was understood, "You know that table is Jiwoo's." Adaora straightened up and said, "I know that now. I didn't know it then. I apologized to him." She had, in fact, apologized to Jiwoo on Wednesday morning when she passed him in the corridor. A brief, genuine, no-drama apology that had apparently confused him more than the original incident. Yuna said, "You should be more careful about how you present yourself here." Adaora looked at her, looked at the 2 friends, looked back at Yuna, said very calmly, "I appreciate the advice. I'll think about it. Have a good evening." She got on Chukwuemeka and rode away. Yuna stood in the courtyard watching her go. One of the friends said, "Did she just—" "Yes," said Yuna. The war, when it started, was quiet. That was the thing about wars at schools like Hanguk Elite Academy. They did not look like wars. They looked like social weather. A table that was suddenly full when Adaora arrived. A study room booking that disappeared. A group project where the groups had already been decided and there was no space. Small frictions, carefully applied, designed to make someone feel invisible without ever saying a word. Adaora noticed. She was not unaware. She was from a family of 5 siblings and had attended a school of 2,000 students in Owerri, and had navigated social complexity since she was old enough to understand that the world had opinions about her. She noticed everything. She also refused to shrink. She found another table near a window and claimed it as her own, with the quiet permanence of someone who had decided. She sorted her study room booking through the International Student Office, who had a separate system. She formed her own study group for the economics seminar. Just herself and 2 other international scholarship students, a Kenyan girl named Amara and a Vietnamese boy named Duck, who was extremely funny and had strong opinions about everything. And they met in the library on Thursday evenings and were, by every measure, the most productive study group in the program. Jiwoo heard about the study group from Subin, who heard about it from a library staff member, who mentioned it because Subin had that quality of face that made people tell him things. He said, "She started her own group." Min-jae said, "Obviously she did." Jiwoo said nothing. But that evening, he went to the library at the time Subin had mentioned and stood in the corridor outside the glass wall and watched, for approximately 4 minutes, a study session in which Adaora was explaining something about monetary policy to Amara and Duck with the particular energy of someone who genuinely loved what they were talking about, drawing diagrams on a notepad, laughing at something Duck said, completely alive in the way that some people are when they are exactly where they are supposed to be. He went back to his room. He sat at his desk. He opened his economics notes. He read the same paragraph 4 times. The thing about Shin Jiwoo that most people at Hanguk Elite Academy did not know, because most people at Hanguk Elite Academy only knew the surface of him, the composed, authoritative surface that he wore like a second uniform, was that he was deeply tired. Not physically tired, existentially tired. The kind of tired that comes from being managed since childhood, from having your future decided in boardrooms before you were old enough to have opinions about it, from being surrounded by people who were kind to you primarily because of your last name, and who would, if the name changed, redirect that kindness without a second thought. He had one genuine friend, Subin. Min-jae was genuinely fond of him, but Min-jae was genuinely fond of most things, and it was hard to feel specially chosen by someone who found the world equally charming. Subin had known him since they were 7 years old, and had never once wanted anything from him except his company and his honest opinion on things. He had never met anyone who argued with him about table ownership and then immediately asked him about Chapter 7. He had never met anyone who apologized to him in a corridor with the brisk efficiency of someone crossing an item off a list and then walked away before he could respond. He had never met anyone who named their bicycle. He found out about the bicycle's name from the gate attendant, who had heard Adaora say, "Good morning, Chukwuemeka," to it on Wednesday, and had mentioned it to a colleague, and it had traveled the way things travel at schools where people pay attention to everything. He told Min-jae. Min-jae said, "She named her bicycle." Jiwoo said, "After her grandfather, apparently." Min-jae was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Jiwoo." Jiwoo said, "Don't." Min-jae said, "I'm just saying." Jiwoo said, "I know what you're saying. Don't." Min-jae smiled, said nothing, let it sit there. The first real conversation happened 3 weeks into the semester on a Friday evening when Adaora was in the school's rooftop garden. She had discovered it on her second week and had been coming up at 6 p.m. on Fridays when it was empty, because the rooftop garden on a Friday evening in Seoul, with the city going gold and the air doing whatever Seoul air does in early autumn, was, in her considered opinion, one of the best things she had encountered in her entire life. She was sitting on a bench with her notebook, not studying, just writing, which she did sometimes to organize the inside of her head, when the rooftop door opened and Jiwoo came through it with the expression of someone who had expected to find the space empty and had recalculated. They looked at each other. Adaora said, "There's no name on this bench either, just so you know." Something happened in his face, the ghost of something. He sat down on the bench on the other end, not close, respectful distance. The city spread out below them, all gold and noise and enormous life. He said, after a while, "How are you finding it here?" She considered the question. She said, "Academically excellent, socially complicated. The tteokbokki from the place 3 streets over is the best thing in Seoul. The rooftop is the second best thing. The bicycle lane on the east side of campus is very well maintained, and I appreciate it personally." He said, "And the people?" She looked at him sideways. "Some of the people are trying to make me feel like I shouldn't be here." He said, "Are they succeeding?" She said, "No." He said, "Good." She looked at him properly. Were you just on my side for a second?" He said, "I'm always on the side of people who should be somewhere being somewhere." She stared at him. That was almost profound. Almost? Almost. You get credit for the attempt. He laughed. It came out before he decided to let it, short and genuine, and he looked briefly surprised by himself the way people do when something real escapes the careful management. Adaora pointed at him. "There it is." He said, "There what is?" She said, "The actual person. Behind all of," she gestured at him generally, "whatever this is you're doing." He said, "I'm not doing anything." She said, "Shin Jiwoo, you are doing so much. You are doing a full performance. The composed thing, the authority thing, the standing in doorways like a whole oil painting thing." He said, "The oil painting thing?" She said, "You know exactly what I mean." He did. That was the problem. He knew exactly what she meant because nobody had ever said it out loud before, and hearing it out loud from someone who was saying it without malice, just with the plain observation of someone who saw things clearly, felt like a window opening in a room that had been closed for a long time. He said, "Chukwuemeka?" She blinked. "What?" "Your bicycle. That's what you called it." She said, "How do you know that?" He said, "I have sources." She stared at him. "You asked about my bicycle." He said, very carefully, "I heard about your bicycle." She said, "That is not the same thing, and you know it." He said nothing. The city glittered below them. A breeze came through that smelled like autumn and street food and the particular freshness of high places. She said, "He was my grandfather. He died when I was 11. He used to say that the most powerful thing a person can do is show up consistently, without apology, and do the work." So, she paused. "I named the bicycle after him because every morning I get on it and ride to this school, and that's what I'm doing, showing up." Jiwoo was quiet for a long moment. He said, very quietly, "정말 멋있어." "That's really cool." She said, "Did you just compliment me in Korean?" He said, "You speak Korean." She said, "I do. I've been waiting for someone to actually speak it to me instead of switching to English the moment they see my face." He said, "미안해. Sorry." She said, "Don't apologize. Just talk to me normally." He looked at her. She looked back. The sun was almost gone now, Seoul lighting up below them in layers of gold and white and deep blue.
He said, "Okay." She said, "Okay." Pause. What followed was not a romance, not yet. What followed was something more interesting than a romance and more dangerous than a friendship. It was a genuine meeting of two people across a distance that the world had put between them and that neither of them was willing to let be the final word. They talked on the rooftop every Friday evening, not always for long, sometimes for 2 hours. They argued about economics, about literature, about the particular philosophy of showing up to things that weren't built for you and building yourself a door. Adaora made him laugh consistently and with increasing frequency, and each time it happened, he looked less surprised by it. Jiwoo said things that were sharp and precise, and occasionally so honest that she sat with them for days afterward. Minjae noticed immediately. He said nothing for 3 weeks, which was, for Minjae, an extraordinary exercise in restraint, and then he said to Jiwoo one morning, "Friday evenings." Jiwoo said, "We talk about economics?" Minjae said, "Sure." Jiwoo said, "It's academic." Minjae said, "Absolutely." Jiwoo said, "Stop smiling." Minjae said, "I'm not smiling." He was fully smiling. Pause. The war escalated in October. Yuna, who was not unintelligent and had noticed the Friday rooftop situation through the particular surveillance network that socially powerful people maintain without calling it surveillance, made a decision. She organized a group project for the International Relations Seminar, the kind of group project where the groups were announced publicly and the composition was, by design, isolating. Adaora was placed in a group with 3 students who had made it quietly clear over the previous weeks that they were not interested in her presence. Adaora sat in the seminar room on the day the groups were announced and felt the particular quality of silence that follows a designed cruelty, the kind where everyone knows what has happened and nobody says so. She opened her notebook. She wrote down the names of her group members. She wrote down the project brief. She began, quietly and methodically, to plan. After the seminar, she went to the library and spent 4 hours producing a preliminary project framework that was, by any academic standard, excellent. She sent it to her group members that evening with a brief, professional message. None of them responded. She sent a follow-up the next morning. Still nothing. She went to the rooftop on Friday. Jiwoo was already there, which had started happening, him arriving first, which neither of them commented on. She sat down. He looked at her. He could tell, because he had learned to read the particular quality of her stillness, that something had happened. She told him about the project group. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Send me the framework." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because I want to read it." She sent it to him that evening. He read it in 20 minutes and sent back a message that said simply, "This is the best preliminary framework in the seminar. They would be foolish not to use it." She stared at her phone. She typed, "Thank you." He typed, "Don't thank me, it's just true." She put her phone down, picked it up, put it down again. Amara, who was sitting across the room doing her own work, said, "Who are you texting?" Adaora said, "Nobody." Amara said, "You have put that phone down and picked it up 4 times in 2 minutes." Adaora said, "I'm thinking." Amara said, "About nobody." Adaora said, "Amara?" Amara said nothing. She was smiling, though. Duke, from his corner, said, without looking up from his laptop, "It's the oil painting boy, isn't it?" Adaora said, "How do you even know about the oil painting thing?" Duke said, "You tell us everything." Pause. The project group situation resolved itself in the way that Adaora's situations tended to resolve themselves, through the sheer quality of her work making silence unsustainable. By the 2nd week, one of the 3 group members, a quiet boy named Park Hyunwoo, who had been going along with the exclusion primarily because he hadn't known how to stop, sent her a message asking a question about the framework. She answered fully and without reference to the previous silence. He said, "Thank you." She said, "Of course." They began working together. By the third week, the other two had joined in with the energy of people who had made a calculation and reached a conclusion. The project received the highest grade in the seminar. The professor read a section of Adaora's analysis aloud to the class as an example of exceptional work. Adaora sat in her seat and felt the specific satisfaction of work recognized, which was different from and more sustaining than the satisfaction of having been right about the people who doubted you. Yuna sat 3 rows back and said nothing. Pause. November arrived, and with it something shifted in the air between Adaora and Jiwoo, the way things shift in late autumn when the temperature changes and you suddenly feel the bones of the season. It happened on a Friday rooftop evening when they had been talking for 2 hours and the city below them was deep blue and Seoul was doing that thing it does at night, where it looks like someone spilled all the lights and nobody cleaned them up, and it was beautiful. Jiwoo said, in the middle of a conversation about something else entirely, "I don't want you to leave at the end of the year." Adaora went still. He said it with the particular care of someone who had been holding something for a while and had decided, quietly, to put it down. She said, "The scholarship is 1 year." He said, "I know." She said, "I have plans. After. Things I want to do. Places." He said, "I know that too." She turned to look at him. He was looking at the city. Profile sharp against the dark blue sky, the composed surface slightly open in the way it only went on the rooftop on Friday evenings, in the particular company of someone who had decided to see through it. She said, "Jiwoo." He turned. They were closer than they usually sat, the bench having a way of shortening distances over weeks of Friday evenings. She said, "What are you saying exactly?" He said, "I'm saying I notice when you're not in a room. I'm saying Friday evenings are the part of my week that I don't manage, I just exist in. I'm saying—" He stopped, looked at her with the dark eyes doing the complicated thing. "I'm saying you rode a bicycle into my school and somehow everything became more interesting." Long pause. Adaora looked at him for a long time. She said, "You are the most dramatic person I have ever met, and I grew up in a house with 5 siblings and a mother who narrated everything she was doing while she was doing it." He said, "Is that a yes or a no?" She said, "It's a, you're going to have to say it properly." He said, "Nega johahai." "I like you." She said, "I know." He said, "Is that all you're going to say?" She said, "Nado." "Me too." He stared at her. She said, "What? You wanted me to do a whole speech? You get 2 words. We're even." He laughed. The full real laugh, the one that had stopped surprising him around week 4, the one that Minjae had predicted and Subin had quietly documented and the rooftop had witnessed more times than either of them had counted. She leaned over and put her head on his shoulder. He went still for 1 second, the stillness of someone receiving something they had been careful not to want too visibly, and then he settled, and the city glittered below them, and Seoul did its beautiful, enormous thing, and 2 people sat in the middle of it, close, real, chosen. Pause. The war ended not with a battle but with something quieter and more permanent. Yuna, who was complicated and not a villain, saw Jiwoo and Adaora together in the corridor one morning, not doing anything dramatic, just walking, his head bent slightly toward hers as she said something, her laughing at something he said, both of them existing in each other's company with the ease of people who had built something real. And she stood and watched for a moment, and then something in her face shifted from opposition into something more honest. She found Adaora in the library that afternoon. She said, in Korean this time, "Your presentation in the International Relations seminar was excellent." Adaora looked at her. Yuna said, I should have said so at the time. Adaora said, Gamsahamnida. Thank you. They were not friends. Not yet. Perhaps not ever, in the full sense. But the war was over. And in its place was something that was at least honest, which was more than most wars left behind. Pause. The year ended in December with a winter that Seoul delivered as only Seoul can, clean and sharp and full of light. The scholarship cohort had a final gathering in the International Student Common Room, warm and loud and a little bit emotional, and Adaora stood in the middle of it thinking about Owerri and her mother's sitting room wall, and her grandfather, who used to say show up, consistently, without apology, and do the work. She had shown up. She had done the work. Jiwoo found her near the window. He handed her a small box. Inside was a small silver bicycle charm for a bracelet. Very simple. No drama. Entirely him. She looked at it for a long time. She said, "This is the most romantic thing you've ever done." He said, "The bar was low." She said, "Jiwoo." He said, "Adaora." She said, "I'm coming back next year." He went very still. "The scholarship is 1 year." She said, "I applied for the extended research program. I found out last week. I didn't want to tell you until I was sure it felt like the right decision and not just—" She paused. "You," he said, very carefully. "And?" She said, "It's both. The program is excellent."
And also you. He looked at her for a long moment, with the dark eyes doing the full, complicated thing, and then he reached over and fixed a loose braid that had fallen across her face, with the particular gentleness of someone who had been wanting to do something like that for a very long time, and had finally run out of reasons not to. She let him. Seoul glittered outside the window. Chukwuemeka was locked to the railing downstairs, reliable and slightly rusty and entirely himself, exactly as promised. If this story did something to you, and I know it did, I felt it through the screen, then I need you to go to the comments right now and type, "Chukwuemeka carried the whole story." Because that bicycle did more work than anyone in this video, and it deserves its flowers. Drop a comment. Tell me your favorite moment. Was it the table scene? Was it the oil painting line? Was it Duck saying, "It's the oil painting boy, isn't it?" from his corner without even looking up? Tell me everything. And if you are here because you love Afro-Korean stories, because you love a Black girl who shows up to rooms that weren't built for her and builds herself a door, subscribe. Hit the bell. Turn on every notification. This channel is yours. There is more coming. More Adaora, more stories, more moments that are going to make you pause the video, rewind, and send a voice note to your friend at midnight saying you need to watch this right now. And if you watched this whole thing without skipping a single second, I see you. You are exactly who this channel is for. Annyeong, my loves.